We talked last time about graphing a line, and we discussed how to graph a line using a table of ordered pairs. Today I'm going to talk about the second way to graph a line, which is called the slope-intercept method. But this method is a little more complicated, so I'm actually going to divide this into two videos. For those of you that are following along in your pre-algebra book for BJ, this is lesson 9.5, this first video. In order to understand the slope-intercept form, the first thing we need to understand is slope. If any of you have ever been skiing or any of you have ever traveled in a mountainous area, you know the slope is how steep something is. And it's the same thing in math. The slope is how steep something is, but we use a fraction to describe how steep that line is. So the formula for slope is simply my rise over my run. The rise is how far up and down. The run is how far left to right. Now, if I have a very steep slope, my rise is going to be a very large number and my run is going to be a very small number. So for example, if the top number is much larger than the bottom number, 5 over 2, 9 over 2, that's going to be a very steep slope. If my bottom number is much larger, it's going to be not as steep of a slope. So for example, 1/3, 1/10, the slope is not going to be very steep. The top number is bigger, 10 over 1, very steep slope. Bottom number is bigger, 1 over 10, not as steep of a slope. This is a very steep slope. This is not a steep slope. The second thing is slopes can be either positive or negative. Now, just like when we read from left to right. In the same way in math, when we try to figure out a slope, we're going to go from left to right. So if it is positive, that means it is going up from left to right. Negative is going down from left to right. So if you look at the line I have here on the board, imagine that this is a road, and you are traveling on this road from left to right. I'm going to draw a little car. If this car starts on the left-hand side and is traveling to the right, is it going up or down? Obviously, this car is going up. Therefore, the slope is positive. It's very important to remember it has to go from left to right. From left to right, if it's going uphill, the slope will be positive. If it is going downhill, for example, if this were my line, from left to right, that would be a negative slope. So from left to right, is it going downhill? Negative. Uphill, positive. Now, how do we figure out the actual numbers of the slope? Well, we're going to choose 2 points on my graph. This is where many students get confused, so let's pay close attention. Here I have a graph. Notice anywhere where my graph crosses a corner, that, remember from what we talked about last lesson, that is a point. So this right here is a point on my graph. I'm going to choose any 2 points. Normally you want to choose the closest 2 points. For example, here I have a point here, and I have a point there. Once I've chosen my 2 points, I want to figure out how far up and over I have to go to get from one point to the other. So I'm going to start with this point. I have to go up 1 and over 1 to get to my next point. So my rise is how far up I go. So since I went up 1, my rise is 1. My run is how far to the right I go. So that is 1. Next, I want to determine if it's a positive or negative slope. We've already said this is going uphill, so it is a positive slope. I can simplify 1 over 1 to just be 1. So my slope in this case would be 1. Now, what about if I have a different line? So let's say, for example, this right here is my line. Okay, the first thing I want to do is I want to find two places where it crosses the corner of a box. So notice right here it crosses a line, but it's not crossing the corner. I want to find where it crosses the corner of a box. Right here it is crossing the corner of a box, so I will choose that point. Here it crosses the line but not the corner. Right here it is crossing right through the corner, so I'm going to choose that point. So I choose 2 points where it crosses the corner of a box. Notice here's a box. Anywhere where it's crossing one of these 4 corners, that is a point. If it goes like this and it does not go through a corner, that is not a point. I have to find a place where the line actually goes through the corner of a box. Now I'm going to count from 1 point how many to the right or left is it to get to the next point, and how many up or down is it. So starting at this point, I'm going to count 1, 2, 3 to the left, and then 1 down. Sometimes it's good to draw a triangle to show the distance. Now, it doesn't matter which one the order in which you do this. I could have gone down first, and then to the right, 1, 2, 3. I'm going to get the same numbers. Remember, the up and down, that's my rise. That number must go on top. So I'm going to write 1 on the top. Left to right, that's going to go on bottom, so that's going to be 3. So my last step is it negative or positive? From left to right, if there was a car on this, they would be going downhill, so that is a negative slope. So my slope would be negative 1/3. So to find the slope, find 2 points. A point must go through the corner of a box. If it doesn't go through the corner of a box, it's not a point. Find 2 points. Start with 1 point. Say how far down or up do I have to go to get to the next point. That's my rise. That number goes on top. Then say how many left or right do I have to go to get to the next point. That's my run. That number goes on the bottom. Finally, ask from left to right, if I put a car on this road, would it be going uphill or would it be going downhill? If it is going uphill, then it is positive. If it is going downhill, then it is negative. That is how you find a slope if they give you the graph. Use rise over run. Find 2 points. Find how far down or up, that's your rise. To the next point, how far left or right to the next point, that is your run. Then is it positive or negative? What about if they don't give me a graph? What about if they give me simply 2 points? Here, I have 2 points. -3, 2 and 5, -2. How would I find the slope in this situation where they only give me 2 points? Well, if they give you 2 points, you can use another formula. This formula is y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. This formula is very simple to use, but you must be very precise. And many students miss this just because they don't pay attention to details. So I would strongly, strongly encourage you to follow these simple instructions if you want to get these right. The first thing you need to do is figure out which one is 2 and which one is 1. How do you do that? Very simple. You get to choose. It's up to you. But once you choose, you have to stick with your decision. So I'm going to say that this first ordered pair is 1. Once I choose, I'm going to label. It is very, very important to label. Otherwise, it's easy to get confused. So I'm going to call this 1. So remember, the first number is x, so I'm going to call this x1. The second number is y, y1. Next, since this is 1, this is going to be 2. So the first is x, x2, y2. After I've labeled, I can plug them into the equation. Again, very important, when you plug into an equation, you must, please, I'm begging you, please use parentheses. So many of my students get these problems wrong simply because they do not label which one's 1 and which one's 2. And then secondly, because they do not use parentheses. They try to do it in their head. You might get it right sometimes, but you will also get it wrong sometimes. So please use parentheses. y2, that's -2, right? So I'm going to plug in parentheses, -2. Minus y1, that is 2. On the bottom, x2 is 5, minus x1 is -3. Here is a perfect example of where many people get this wrong. If they do this in their head, they look at 5 minus 3 and they think 2. But that's wrong. Because it's not 5 minus 3. It's 5 minus -3. So you must include the negative inside the parentheses. If I have two negatives, what does that make? It makes a positive. So it's not 5 minus 3, it's 5 plus 3. Because it's 5 minus -3, which is 5 plus 3. -2 and -2, same sign. I add and I use that sign. 5 plus 3 is 8. Remember, if I have one negative, my answer is negative. And then also make sure you always reduce. So this is going to reduce to -1/2. So my slope is -1/2. When it goes through -3, 2, and 5, -2, my slope is -1/2. What happens if I end up with a negative on the top and on the bottom? What would have happened if I had this? Well, two negatives make a positive. So I would have to reduce that, and then the negatives make a positive, so it's just +1/2. That is how you use the slope formula. So to review, if they give you the graph and they want the slope, choose 2 points, must go through the corner of a box to be a point. Start with 1 point, count how many up or down to get to the next point. That's your rise, put that number on top. Then count how many left or right to get to the next point. That's your run, that goes on bottom. Finally, ask yourself from left to right, is it going up, then it's positive, or down, then it's negative. If they give you 2 points, you're going to use the formula y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. Start by labeling your points. You can choose either one for 1 and either one for 2, but you must label them. x1, y1, x2, y2. Then just plug it into the formula using parentheses. If there's one negative, your answer is negative. Doesn't matter if it's on the top or bottom. If there's 2 negatives, the answer is positive, and then make sure you reduce your fraction. That is how you find the slope. Next time, we'll talk about how to use slope in the slope-intercept form to graph an equation.